If you enjoy this video, help us to continue producing the content you love by subscribing to our channel and pressing the like button.
All right, so get ready because today we're diving into something a little unexpected. Cemeteries.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But not just any cemetery. We're talking Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn.
Interesting. I've heard of it.
Right. You wouldn't think a cemetery could be as interesting as, say, Niagara Falls, but Greenwood has quite the story. We've got a bunch of sources to dig into. Wikipedia, a History.com article, Greenwood's website, and even some research on an artist who focused on the cemetery.
Sounds like we've got a lot to uncover.
We do. And our main goal today is to go beyond just the famous names buried there. We really want to understand how this cemetery became such a cultural landmark in New York City and what it can tell us about how society, especially the social scene, has changed over time in New York.
I'm all for it. And it all starts in 1838 with this new idea, kind of radical at the time, the rural cemetery.
Rural cemetery. What did that even mean back then? I mean, I'm imagining lots of open space, maybe like a meadow, a far cry from what you typically think of when you picture a crammed, gloomy city graveyard.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It was a huge shift in thinking back then. Most city cemeteries were these packed churchyards. Not exactly the most peaceful resting places.
I can imagine.
But Greenwood, which was inspired by Mount Auburn Cemetery in Massachusetts, wanted something totally different.
So are we talking like a park, almost?
Yeah.
That actually sounds kind of nice. A place to get away from the city, wander around in nature, even if it is technically a cemetery.
That's exactly it. It was designed to be a place where people could, believe it or not, actually enjoy spending time. And this was even before we had Central Park or Prospect Park. So Greenwood became the park to visit for a while. And it's huge.
Yeah.
478 acres, rolling hills, ponds, over 7,000 trees.
Hold on, 478 acres, that's massive. You're telling me Victorians in their, their Sunday best were just picnicking among the headstones? That's wild. Like, honey, pack the sandwiches. We're having lunch with Great Aunt Mildred.
You're not far off. It's true. In the mid-1800s, Greenwood was the place to be seen. People would come all the way from Manhattan just to stroll through the grounds. It was the place to be.
Wow, what a change of pace from the hustle and bustle of the city. I love it. Although, this tranquil oasis we've been picturing, it actually has a pretty intense past.
Oh, absolutely. It does. Remember those 478 acres, all those rolling hills? Well, the highest point, Battle Hill, it earned that name during the American Revolution.
Wait a minute, you're telling me this peaceful cemetery was a war zone at one point?
Oh, yeah. It was a key spot during the Battle of Brooklyn back in 1776.
Wow.
And although the British won that particular fight, the bravery shown on that hill is still commemorated today with a monument. It's a stark reminder that even the most serene places can have a dramatic, even violent past.
So we've got this massive cemetery, once a battlefield, then it became the place to be during the Victorian era. It's like this snapshot of New York City history, all in one place.
It is.
But something tells me that not everyone had the same Greenwood experience.
Right. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Even in death, social hierarchies had a way of, well, showing up. And at Greenwood, you can actually see it in the layout.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's this distinction between what they called the public lots and then the private plots.
Public versus private. It sounds like a tale of two cemeteries all in one. I'm guessing there was a big difference in how much things cost, too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, picture this. In the late 1800s, if you wanted a single grave in a public lot, it would cost you around $31.
Good.
But for a private plot, you're looking at over $160, and some of the fancier ones, those could set you back over $1,200.
Wow. Talk about a price tag on eternity. It makes you think about those who ended up in the public lots. What were their stories?
You're talking about the working class, immigrants who had just arrived, really anyone who couldn't swing the cost of a private plot. And sadly, those stories are much harder to uncover. The records aren't great. There are fewer monuments. It's like they were forgotten even in death.
That's heartbreaking. It's like there's this whole other layer to Greenwood, all these whispers from the edges. You know, one of our sources, the artist Rowan Renee, she called her exhibition about Greenwood the perimeter path. And I'm starting to understand why that image is so powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Renee's work was all about those less documented areas, especially the freedom lots.
Freedom lots. Just hearing that term sends chills down my spine. What's the story there?
So these were sections specifically designated for Black New Yorkers. And many of those buried there were born into slavery.
It's hard to imagine the kinds of things they must have lived through.
And it's not just slavery in the South. We have to remember that slavery was legal in New York State all the way up until the 1820s.
It's easy to forget that.
Right. These were people who had seen some of the worst of American history firsthand.
It breaks my heart to think about how many stories are probably lost to time.
You're right. It really makes you think about whose stories get told, whose get like literally carved in stone, and whose are just, I don't know, forgotten. It's like this microcosm of history itself playing out right there in Greenwood.
It is. It really is. But Greenwood isn't just some relic of the past, right?
Yeah.
It's still a part of the fabric of Brooklyn today.
100%. In fact, you might be surprised to hear that Greenwood is still an active cemetery.
Really? I guess why wouldn't it be, right?
Well, think about it. Almost 600,000 people have been buried there over the years.
Wait, 600,000? That's incredible. That's like more than some cities' entire populations.
It's a testament to Greenwood's enduring legacy.
For sure. But it's more than just burials now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's become a real cultural destination. They get over 200,000 visitors every year.
Wow. What are people coming to see?
Well, the history, of course. The art and the architecture are big draws, too. And some people, I think, just come to enjoy the natural landscape, which is truly incredible. It's pretty amazing. It's come full circle.
Oh,
Well, it started as this kind of Victorian escape from the city, a place to get away from it all. And now it's this modern-day cultural hub that draws people in. But, I think it still offers that sense of escape, that place for reflection and exploration. And speaking of exploring, I got to ask about something I found really interesting while we were prepping for our deep dive today. Greenwood's catacombs.
catacombs.
So
Yes.
they were actually designed to deal with a very real Victorian fear, being buried alive.
Can you imagine? That was a real fear people had.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes you think about how differently they must have viewed death back then.
Totally. And Greenwood, with its unique blend of history, art, and these sort of cultural quirks, it's like this lens through which we can look back and examine those anxieties.
Exactly. It really is fascinating.
It's funny, thinking about those catacombs, it makes you wonder, did they actually make people feel better about dying? Or did they just add a whole other layer of creepiness to it all? Like, oh, I'm terrified of being buried alive, so let's put me in a wall above ground instead.
Right. It's like, which would you prefer? But that's what I love about Greenwood. It really gets you thinking about these big questions. It's not just a collection of graves. It's about how we as humans deal with death and remembrance.
Exactly. And how some people's stories get remembered in these grand ways, with huge monuments and mausoleums.
And others, well, they kind of fade into the background.
Right. Like we were saying, those public lots versus the private plots, the freedom lots.
Mm.
Those are stories we almost lost completely.
But then there's that other layer too. Greenwood as it exists today. It's not stuck in the past. It's a living part of the city.
That's so important to remember, and it's something we haven't really touched on yet. What's it like to visit Greenwood today?
Yeah. It's one thing to talk about the history, but I'm dying to know what it's like to actually be there. To wander those paths, see those monuments up close, to get a sense of the scale of the place.
You really can't grasp it until you've been there. Those rolling hills, the trees, the ponds. It's unlike any cemetery I've ever seen.
It sounds magical, honestly. It is. There's a reason they call it the park before the park. It really was a precursor to places like Central and Prospect Park. And you know what? In a way, it still is that kind of escape for people, even today.
That's really beautiful. And it kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? From a place to escape the city to a place that's a destination in itself. Greenwood Cemetery, everyone. It's a reminder that history isn't just something you read in a book. It's all around us, just waiting to be discovered. And sometimes it's even a little bit spooky.